The rain pounded against the grand estate's towering windows as the wind howled through the trees, rattling the branches like unseen hands clawing at the night. Inside, warm candlelight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the lavishly furnished rooms. The storm outside was fierce, but not as cold as the heart of the man who owned this house. Mr. Gerald Whitmore, a wealthy businessman, sat in his massive leather chair, sipping aged whiskey, his sharp eyes scanning the financial reports in front of him. To him, the world was a game of numbers, and people were mere pieces to be moved or discarded. He was feared by his employees, resented by his peers, and utterly alone, though he would never admit it. Downstairs in the servants' quarters, young Maria scrubbed the kitchen floor with tired, trembling hands. She had been working in the Whitmore estate for nearly a year now, though it felt much longer. The pay was meager, the hours long, and the master of the house never acknowledged her presence unless barking an order. Still, she endured. Her mother was sick, and every coin she earned went toward her medicine. "Maria!" barked Mrs. Hastings, the head housekeeper, her sharp voice slicing through the air. "Take this tray up to Mr. Whitmore's study, and don't you dare spill a drop." Maria wiped her hands hastily and picked up the silver tray, carefully balancing the steaming bowl of soup and fresh bread. Her heart pounded as she climbed the grand staircase. She had never been inside Mr. Whitmore's study before. The house staff spoke of it in hushed tones, as if it were a dragon's lair. Standing before the heavy wooden door, she took a deep breath and knocked gently. "Enter." She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room smelled of old books, leather, and whiskey. Mr. Whitmore barely looked up from his papers. She walked cautiously toward the desk and placed the tray down. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind from the open balcony door sent the papers on his desk flying. Instinctively, Maria rushed forward, catching them mid-air. She quickly stacked them back neatly, smoothing out the creases. "You're surprisingly quick," Mr. Whitmore muttered, watching her curiously for the first time. "I'm used to catching things before they fall, sir," she said softly, thinking of her mother's frail body when she had collapsed last winter. He studied her for a moment before waving his hand. "That will be all." Maria nodded and turned to leave. But just as she reached the door, a deep cough racked Mr. Whitmore's chest. He grimaced, setting his whiskey down. Maria hesitated. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" He shot her a look of mild surprise. No one ever asked him such a question. "It's just a cough," he said dismissively. She hesitated, then did something she never would have dared under normal circumstances. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, wrapped packet of herbs. "This is ginger and honey tea, sir. My mother swears by it when she gets a cough." Mr. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Are you a maid or a doctor?" "Just a maid, sir," she said, looking down. "But I know what it's like to care for someone who won't admit they need help." There was a flicker of something in his expression, something almost human. For the first time in years, someone had offered him kindness without expecting anything in return. He took the packet from her hand, turning it over in his fingers. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to try." Maria smiled. "I'll bring you some hot water, sir." From that night on, something shifted. The next evening, when Maria came to collect his tray, she found the cup empty. He had actually tried it, and for the first time he didn't ignore her. "Your tea worked," he admitted begrudgingly. "You're either very lucky or very wise. I'd like to think a bit of both, sir." The days passed, and Maria continued to bring him the tea. He started asking her small questions: where she was from, how long she had worked in his home, what books she liked to read. It was the most he had spoken to any servant in years. One evening he noticed her rubbing her hands together, trying to warm them. "Why are your hands so cold?" he asked. Maria hesitated before answering. "The servants' quarters don't have much heating, sir." "But we manage." He frowned, but said nothing. The next morning, every servant awoke to find new wool blankets folded neatly at the foot of their beds. The butler claimed they had been ordered months ago, but Maria knew the truth. Winter came, and with it, Christmas Eve. The house was decorated lavishly, but as always, Mr. Whitmore spent the evening alone in his study. Maria, finished with her duties, prepared to leave when she noticed light still shining under his door. Gathering her courage, she knocked softly. "Come in." She stepped inside, hesitating before speaking. "I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, sir." He looked up, startled. No one had wished him that in years. He nodded slowly. "Merry Christmas, Maria." She smiled, then placed a small cloth-wrapped package on his desk. "Just a little something." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a pair of knitted gloves. "I made them myself," she said quickly. "I know they're not fancy, but—" "They're perfect," he interrupted, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He ran his fingers over the stitching, swallowing thickly. "Thank you." A long silence stretched between them before he finally spoke again. "Maria, I've been reviewing the household records. I see you've been sending most of your wages home." Her heart pounded. Was he going to dismiss her? Had she overstepped? He reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope. "Consider this a Christmas bonus." Maria's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was enough money to cover her mother's medical expenses for a year. Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll keep making that tea," he said with a small smile. Maria laughed, wiping her eyes. "Every night, sir." That winter, something changed in the Whitmore estate. Laughter could be heard in the servants' quarters. Warmth filled the once empty halls. And at the heart of it all was a maid's kindness, melting the coldest of hearts.